Our second speaker is Professor Ragnar Árnason, who is a professor of fisheries economics here at the University of Iceland. He has, of course, published widely in the field of resource economics and has served as an advisor on the fisheries to the World Bank and many other international organizations, as well as individual countries. He will give his presentation here on the relation between fisheries taxation and the economic efficiency. Ragnar, permissions.
Well, good afternoon. It's not easy to have to follow the masterful presentation by Professor Leibkap, but I will do my best, and I have the advantage to be able to talk to the particular Icelandic situation. My topic more specifically is fisheries taxation, not property rights as such, but as Professor Leibkap showed, taxation affects the quality and value of property rights, and heavy taxation will eliminate the favorable economic impacts and incentive creation of property rights. So let me start by saying this. Many fisheries, especially ocean fisheries, are potentially extremely valuable. And this has led to the suggestion that these should be subject to special taxation. In my talk, I will contend that such taxation, special taxation, anything above normal taxation of industries, would most likely be economically and socially detrimental, even very detrimental, depending on the level of taxation. And the key arguments that have been forwarded for this kind of taxation are mostly fallacious. So much of my talk will just go over these key arguments, according to me, and I think that's a fair description of the arguments, and explaining why they're wrong and why they don't hold. So first question is, how valuable are these fish resources? Globally speaking, they're not of any great value compared to, let's say, oil resources. But individually, fisheries can be extremely valuable in the sense that the net economic benefits from a particular fishery can be a very, very high percentage of the landed value. Even higher than, in fact, actually much higher than the net benefits from a typical oil field. There are oil fields that range over very, very profitable and productive oil fields to those that are very marginal. But many fisheries, commercial fisheries today, can be very, very profitable. What do I mean by net economic benefits? I'm talking about profits, more or less accounting profits, plus the wages that are being paid by the fishing industry above the going wage. Above the normal wage, which is pretty common in fisheries around the world, because usually the crew is remunerated on the basis of a share in the value of landed catch. So, more precisely, 20% to 40% of revenues being net economic benefits, including the extra pay to the crew, is not uncommon in well-managed fisheries in America, American Pacific, American Atlantic, and the North Atlantic. These are common numbers these days, 20 to 40% as net economic benefits from these fisheries. And I lean towards the view that this could be replicated across the whole world. The big fishery of the world is really in Asia, Southeast Asia in particular, which are terribly managed at the moment. These are pretty well managed fisheries, mostly on the basis of individual quotas that are more or less transferable. Our empirical fisheries models, we like to construct models and spend a lot of time and effort on devising models and estimating these models in fisheries economics. According to these models, even higher benefits than what we are seeing today, 20 to 40% of revenues, are attainable. For good fisheries like the Icelandic cod fishery, this could be up to 70 or 80%, even higher. Other fisheries, let's say the seið fishery, ufsa veiðarnar, maybe 20, 30%. You know, it depends on the stock and the market price of the stock and how big the stock is and how easily catchable these fish are. Now, let me move to the main topic of my talk, 3 fundamental fallacies to justify special taxation. This is what we call a dramatic title in academia. Fallacy number 1. Fisheries profits / benefits, net economic benefits, are generated by the resource and not the fishing firms. Okay, so it comes from the resource. It's like manna from heaven. If you have access to the resource, you get these benefits. And they are more or less constant. And people infer from that fallacy that these profits that are actually being realized are unearned. So those who have these profits, or get these profits, they do so undeservedly. Okay, the second fallacy, fisheries profits / benefits go to the owners of the fishing rights and not to other members of society. So it's just the owners of the rights that get everything. Therefore, in the interest of fairness and justice, these profits, benefits, must be expropriated by the state. And this is the second fallacy. Third fallacy is that fisheries profits / benefits can be taxed without negative economic consequences. And when I say taxed, I could be more general and say expropriated, you know, by other means that would not be normal taxation. So these benefits can be expropriated without negative economic consequences. And therefore, the inference from that is that this is an ideal tax base. You know, this is so much different from income taxes, tariffs, even value-added tax. This doesn't distort anything, so let's use it to the fullest. And of course, reduce the other taxes at the same time, and people are smiling in the room because, of course, we know taxes are never reduced. Not really. So, let me tackle these 3 fallacies, fallacy by fallacy. The first one was that the profits / benefits are generated by the resource. That this is false follows immediately from standard economic theory. And now the problem is that there are not all that many economists in this room, so I have to explain a little bit more. But it's pretty obvious that to produce landings and therefore be able to get some net economic benefits, profits, you have to use a lot more than just the resource. You have to use capital of various kinds, equipment. You have to use labor of various kinds. You also have to rely on your own inventiveness, organization of your company, your marketing ability, and your enterprise to having been able to go into this fishery and various other things. There's a lot of different inputs that are used to produce the output, landings of fish. And so therefore, it just follows immediately, it cannot be only the resource. Especially when you keep this in mind, if this were true, the benefits just flow from the resource itself without any human effort, why didn't we have any significant net benefits from our fisheries in the 19th century? In that century, the fish stocks were much, much bigger than they are today, 2 or 3 times bigger. But Icelandic fishermen, they were just reaping very meager living from these resources. There was very little capital generated. And if we go closer to our current time, the period from 1978 to 1983, which was before the establishment of the individual quota system, stocks were much bigger, especially the cod stock. We had an annual catch of 300,000 to 400,000 tons, but nothing but losses. There was a economic and political crisis every 3 or 4 years in the fishing industry. The government had to reduce the exchange rate of the krona to save the industry. It established a series of funds to stabilize the industry. There was almost a continual emergency in this base industry of Iceland. The real reason for increased profitability in the Icelandic fishing industry today are these things. And the same applies to other fishing industries or fisheries around the world that have improved greatly in recent years. It's, first of all, rebuilding of fish stocks. To do that, you have to make a big effort. You have to cut down on quotas, especially if you start with a low fish stock, which is typical, then you have to cut down on your allowed catches. You have to go through a period of poor catches and therefore poor profitability until the stocks are grown again and you can harvest from them safely and in a stable manner, you know, from year to year. You also have to reduce fishing effort and the fishing fleet. This is by no means painless. Certainly, if you move from basically an open access fishery, a poorly or weakly managed fishery, to a fishery based on a strong fisheries management system, a big chunk of your fishing capital, your boats and your ability to exert a great deal of fishing effort is obsolete. The price drops like a stone. And I see people in this room that have gone through that experience. Boats become almost without value. So you have to pay for the privilege to stay in the business under those circumstances. Then you have to rationalize your fishing operation and your fish processing operation and your marketing operation to get the maximum benefits. Of course, you're not forced to do this, but to get the benefits that we see, these things have to take place. You have to make great effort to improve the quality of landings and maintain the quality of the fish from the landing spot to the final consumer. It's a complicated, costly effort. You have to improve the marketing of the fish products. That's a big business. You know, marketing is complicated. It's usually not in fishing companies' accounts classified as investment, but it's really an investment. You establish marketing channels, and you do that at great cost. Usually you lose for the first period, 1 or 2 or 3 years, and then you start to reap benefits and you do these investments. These are really investments. You do this for the long run. If you establish a good marketing channel and business connection with high-paying customers, you want to maintain that for a long time. It's an investment almost totally similar to investment in factories and fishing vessels, except you cannot point to the thing. It's not physical. Still an investment and very costly. Then you have to do innovations and technological advances. You have to incorporate these. You even have to develop those things yourself, as the Icelandic fishing industry has done to a great extent through the so-called fisheries cluster. You do that to increase the profits, and that appears as profits not coming from the resource as such. And then you have to discover, to the extent possible, new fishing opportunities. And during the duration of the Icelandic ITQ system, we have discovered, or I didn't do it, the owners of the fishing firms discovered several new opportunities, blue whiting, mackerel, and a few others. And there might be still more. There are a lot of species of fish that are not being exploited at the moment because the market isn't there, but we are seeing around the world a tendency to create markets for new species. And that's a costly undertaking. So all of these things you have to do to generate the profits that we see today. So these things are undertaken at great cost to the fishing industry, and it's responsible for most of the benefits that we are seeing under the ITQ system. That can be calculated. We can calculate the contribution of bigger fish stocks. That was actually a result of an investment in fish stocks, and compare it to the benefits coming from higher prices and more clever marketing and reduced costs of various kinds. So these are the real reasons for increased profits. Fallacy number 2, only holders of fishing rights gain. This is an assertion without any analysis. This is just a claim being made in the sort of newspapers and political debate. There is not a single paper on this that I've been able to find, because it doesn't hold any water, really. Like I say, simple examination of the facts quickly shows that this is not true. The benefits of fishing rights stemming from the fishing rights, our fisheries management system, are widely spread around society. Both in the short run, in the same year, so to speak, and also, and even more so, in the long run, as explained by Professor Leibkap. Some of the factors that promote a wide distribution of fisheries benefits are the following. First of all, the share of the crew in landed value. I've already explained that. Secondly, remuneration of labor in the fishing industry. If the fishing industry and the fish processing industry and the fish marketing industry are profitable, the whole integrated operation is profitable, the marginal productivity of labor goes up. And therefore, you are induced to pay them more. It's in the own interest of the owner to pay them more. And of course, labor, if you believe that wages and labor remuneration is set by the trade unions, they are in a much better position to claim higher pay. Thirdly, more favorable exchange rates. It's pretty obvious. The cost of fishing goes down greatly. That means that we import much less. So there's less expenditure of hard currency for our fishing operation. At the same time, the price per unit of landing goes up and the export prices rise. So there's net saving in currency. What does that mean in the foreign exchange market? There's a higher price of Icelandic krona. And what does a higher price of the Icelandic krona mean? It means that those of us, and we all do, that consume imports in various types, and also those that invest foreign investment goods in Iceland, we benefit from this significantly. General taxation, not any special taxation. General taxation means that a big part of all these profits is taxed. It's taxed with the fishermen, it's taxed with the fish workers that get a raise, it's taxed on, everyone is taxed because of higher, basically, purchasing power because of the exchange rate change, and of course, income taxation for the fishing companies, and then on top of that, you may have special taxation. But before the special taxation, the normal taxation takes a lot. I will explain that in a minute. Then in the more long run, you have demand effects. What is that? That means, everyone, a big part of society, possibly just everyone, has now higher purchasing power, so they demand more goods and services. That means that those people who are supplying these things now have a better operating environment, and they will get a little extra profits, little extra pay, maybe a great deal, who knows. And then investment and growth. What is that? Well, the retained profits by the fishing firms and by everyone else who has now a higher income is going to be invested directly and indirectly. What does that mean? The investment, by the way, is in physical capital and also in human capital, and maybe to a certain extent in organization. What do these investments mean? It means that economic growth in Iceland will be higher than before, and the benefits of economic growth generally fall to the entire population, more or less. So, first of all, I already talked about this quite a bit, share of the crew and the value of the landings. Most fisheries around the world, the crew receives a share of the value of the landings, therefore the crew benefits from a higher income per unit effort. In Iceland, it would, and this also holds for other countries, I would say that the typical crew member is now producing 2 to 3 times the quantity he was producing before. And at the same time, the price of the landings, the unit price has gone up significantly. I don't know the percentage, but I would be surprised to get anything less than 20% in the demersal fisheries, cod and haddock fisheries and these kinds of fisheries, due to the quality improvements that are partly taking place aboard the vessels and also flow back from the increased marketing effort. So they get a big part of this. Well, they get a part of this. In Iceland, the share of the crew in the gross value of landings is between 30 and 40%. And this is similar to the rest of the world. I've studied fisheries all over the world, and And it's almost a universal rule that the crew is remunerated on the value of landings, and there is a very good economic reason for that. And the percentage is anywhere from, let's say, 20% to 50%. That would be typical. If you run a canoe fishery, like the Africans do a lot, then the crew gets close to 50%. So. Okay, and then the remuneration of labor. Fisheries rationalization leads to increased labor productivity. It's our work now produces more because the price goes up and the quality goes up and all of these things. And that means that the wage that labor receives should be increased correspondingly. Should meaning that there is an economic force increasing this wage towards the marginal productivity. I apologize for that word. Towards the increased marginal productivity of each worker. At least, if these economic laws do not hold, at least labor is in a strong position to get a raise. And this is exactly what we seem to be seeing in the Icelandic fishing industry. It's even talked about in the papers that various companies have paid their general labor, various fishing companies have paid their general labor a certain bonus, like the bankers get at the end of the year. You know, that is symptomatic of this. And we also know that basically the wage level has gone up in the fishing industry, not just for the crew members. Exchange rates, well, we all know in Iceland and many other fishing countries, the fishing industry exports much of its products. In Iceland, it's like 98% of the total landings goes abroad. That leads to stronger exchange rates, as I explained before. And it also reduces fishing industry profits because now you get fewer kronur for your exports than before. And it benefits consumer imports, as I already explained. In Iceland, I've done this calculation just roughly, and I believe the strengthening of exchange rate at this point of time may be anywhere from between 2% to 6% just because of this. So this means if we would somehow be able to erase the impact of the individual quota system, the Icelandic exchange rate would be 2 to 6% lower than it is today. That is essentially what I'm saying. With further progress, the impact will be greater. Taxes. Well, in most countries, most Western countries at least, a substantial part of increased income is paid to the government in the form of taxes, and this certainly holds for Iceland. Typical taxes are income taxes, value-added taxes, duties and excise taxes of various kinds. In Iceland, this kind of taxation is anywhere between 40 and 45% of all income in Iceland. It just goes to the government, including the municipal government. And I believe for the fishing industry, the percentage is higher because incomes are generally higher in the fishing industry and we have a progressive taxation. So, what does that mean? That means a big part of the additional profits goes straight to the government without any particular effort. So, I did a sort of a stylistic calculation on all of this. I assumed, let's say the crew gets 35% of the gross value of landings. Fishing labor manages to get about 5% of the increased profits to the companies after they pay the crew. The exchange rate increased by 4%, so the midpoint between, what did I say, 2 and 6, and the taxation is 42%. Then, approximately, crew and fish workers, workers in the fishing industry, get about 21.3% of the gains, whatever they may be. 1/5, right ahead. Others, the general population in society gets 2.3% through exchange rate effects. The state gets 42%, as I explained, and the companies, the owners of fishing rights, they get 34.4%. So roughly 1/3 during the first round goes to the owners of fishing rights. That's about all. These numbers, with 1 digit, sound as if they're very, very precise, but they're not really, just the calculation is precise. We are talking, you know, for the companies anywhere, let's say 25 to 40%, you know, depending. But I think, you know, this is 1/3 is a good approximation. And the same applies to other numbers, except the state. That is pretty clear. But these are just the first round distribution of the benefits. This ignores demand and economic growth effects that are usually much more widely distributed. So the longer term impacts include the demand effects, as I said, higher income in the fishing industry and by all the other initial claimants on the profits will lead to a higher demand for goods and services of various kinds, and that means they reap part of the benefits. They get some extra surplus from selling their services. And then we have the economic growth effects, added income generated by the fishery, by the fishing companies, and by everyone else who benefits, will flow into investments, either indirectly through the banking and financial system or directly. You know, retained profits are typically by companies used for investments. These might not be the investments in the fishing industry. It might be the case, but it could also be investments in other industries that are deemed to be more profitable. And these investments generate economic growth, and that benefits all sectors of the economy. Okay, the third fallacy. It's possible to tax fisheries profits without any negative economic impacts. So taxing fisheries profits, in that context, the fisheries profits are usually called rents, sometimes even resource rents, that can never be measured. They don't even exist as a measurable quantity. Rents, overall rents may, but not the resource rents. And the idea is you tax this, and if you have a very simple diagram that you could use in, I almost say elementary school, but you know, maybe in high school, then it seems as if, you know, you will not affect any behavior. And this is a theory that, or a myth really, based on a very naive interpretation of Ricardo's theory of land rents. Ricardo was a famous economist, UK economist in the early 19th century. And this idea was made famous in the late 19th century by the populist Henry George. It's called Georgism. He went around the United States, he went to Europe, promoting this idea of a land tax. You know, all taxes should be abolished, but a land tax imposed. And this Georgism has now been reborn in connection with fisheries rents or fisheries profits. There is no formal analysis to support this claim. I haven't found any paper that explain how this is supposed to work. On the contrary, there is a lot of analysis showing this to be false. And the point is, as Professor Leibkopf said, these fisheries profits, they are sensitive to taxation and to various other things, the design of the rights, the duration of the rights, and et cetera, et cetera. And they go down, especially over time, if you tax them heavily. So to argue against this fallacy, I will go more to the Icelandic context. I will explain this in the Icelandic context, how this fails. But basically my argument is applicable to other fisheries as well. So first of all, taxation will erode the international competitiveness of the Icelandic fishing industry. We have to realize that 98% of the production is exported, and it's being sold in very, very competitive markets, high-paying markets, primarily Europe and America, Japan, and high-paying countries. In this market, we have supply from countries like Canada, the US. The US basically supplies itself, but it also exports to other areas. Norway, our good brothers from Norway, New Zealand even, and many EU countries. They are entering this market with the aim of maximizing their profits. And many of these countries also have individual transferable quotas. And in many cases, these quotas are more secure and more high-quality property rights than the quotas in Iceland. And their fish stocks, contrary to what a lot of Icelanders believe, are just as good as the Icelandic ones, if not better, at least in many cases. We have good natural conditions for fish stocks in Iceland, but our fish stocks are not all that great. And there are other stocks in other places that grow even faster. These countries, these competitors, do not pay special taxes on their fisheries profits. If they pay anything, they pay normal income taxes, and some of them are even being subsidized by their governments. Therefore, if we tax our fishing industry, these competitors will get a competitive edge. How will that work itself out? Well, fish markets, good fish markets, are composed of many niches, high-paying niches, where often restaurant niches, something like that, where relatively affluent consumers demand high-quality fish, and they demand, reliable quality, and they don't mind paying substantial amount for a given volume of fish, 10 times, 20 times the lending price of the same fish. The restaurants and others that cater to this kind of a market, they want reliable supply, high quality, and guaranteed long-term supply. Iceland has been extremely successful in exploiting these markets. The Icelandic fish market system used to be the best in the world in this way. We managed to exploit all these niches, many of them. And even the macro data comparing Iceland and Norway shows in many cases that we are getting up to 10% higher price for our exports of white fish than they are getting, although the species are almost identical. We were the first comers. We hold many of these markets. However, and our competitors that are getting stronger and stronger because they now have the ITQ system and all the benefits that come with that, have not challenged us very much in these markets. Why? Because they of course, rational people, rational companies, and they say, well, the Icelanders are, they're already there. They are rich. They have very profitable industry. We may try to enter. How can we enter? By offering a lower price or higher quality or better packaging or something like that, something that the customer wants. But we will lose that fight with the Icelanders. Iceland will retaliate somehow, or the Icelandic exporters, and we will lose because they got more money than we do. Okay, or at least the same amount. And a certain advantage that is attached to being first. If we take away a significant, well, even a small part of the profits of the Icelandic companies and threaten the security of the individual quotas, Iceland will not be as strong in that kind of a competitive game, price game, or whatever you call it. And the wolves that circulate, these markets and look hungrily at the possible profits will be all the more willing to enter. And there is no doubt in my mind that we will ultimately lose because it's a question of strength. To tax our fishing industry, or for that matter, any industry in Iceland, more highly than our competitors do in the international marketplace, is just like sending our soccer team to an international game with 10 kilograms weights on every player, or higher. That's a recipe for disaster. So, I believe something like that will squeeze Iceland out of the most lucrative markets. That means that the export price of fish might drop, by maybe 10%, maybe higher. We will have to make do with the less profitable markets. We're already seeing this in the mackerel for a different reason, where we've been excluded from some good markets. It also reduces the competitiveness of the fishing industry domestically. Taxation means that now the fishing industry is less attractive for companies and for individuals and for finance also. So So companies and individuals may withdraw from this sector and use their talents elsewhere. And the financial capital that every industry needs for investments and development will become more expensive. Why? Because it's now more risky to lend to this business that has less retained profits. So what is this? This is an economic distortion. By taxation, we are telling the population and the enterprising companies and individuals of the country that you shouldn't go into that business, go into something else. So they will of course act accordingly, and they will move their efforts to industries that are inherently less productive. But they seem more productive after the special tax. So this is the fundamental argument why all industries should be taxed at the same rate. Don't differentiate, because then you create artificial incentives to do the wrong thing from a social perspective. Thirdly, this is going to reduce investment in the fishing industry. Why? Because now there are less expected benefits of the investment, because you only retain a smaller fraction of the profits because of the taxation. You also have less retained profits to use for investments. Your investments will be riskier because of a lower profit margin, and you have to worry about this new tax. Is it going to stay constant? Are the government promises that might be attached or they may not be attached, are they reliable? You will have to pay a higher rate of interest for pretty much the same reason I explained before, because the bankers and the financiers, they will see, well, you're less profitable than before, therefore you're more risky. And also you're paying the special tax you've been made an example of, and who knows what is going to happen. So the interest rates for the capital that you want to borrow for your developments is going to go up. So less productivity growth in the fishing industry. At the same time, our competitors will have the other productivity growth, and that effect will also squeeze us out of the most lucrative markets. It reduces the discovery and innovation in the fishing industry. Exactly for the same reason. Discovery and innovation is just another kind of investment. You spend money in the hope that you will get some research, some beneficial research outcomes that will make you more profitable, or you'll find a new fishery, or your new product that you develop is going to be a success in the marketplace. This now is more risky because you have less profits and you have this uncertain tax. There are less expected benefits of this activity, quite aside from the risk because of the tax. Therefore, there will be less incentive to engage in discovery and innovation. If the fishing industry would have realized what had happened in the mackerel fishery, where the allocation of, well, the grandfathering principle has been violated to a significant extent, and this particular fishery heavily taxed, it is almost certain that the efforts to establish a catch history in this particular shared fishery would have been less, maybe dramatically less. So less progress, tendency to stagnation, because less discovery and innovation, maybe nothing. Also, this reduces overall investment in the economy. Why? Because now there's increased risk, not only in the fishing industry, but all resource-based industries. And fundamentally, all industries are resource-based, some more than others. In Iceland, we have most of our big industries are resource-based. We have the power-intensive industries, we have the tourist industry, and we have farming. It's all natural resource-based. So if something, special taxation gets hold in the Icelandic fishing industry, the other industries will be faced with an increased probability that the same will happen to them. And so the risk of investment in those industries will also be increased. And then for the country as a whole, because of this increased risk and increased government participation, basically in the industries, the interest on foreign capital will go up, especially to the fishing industry, because of this increased risk and less retained profits. So, you know, just a small percentage increase of foreign capital or foreign funds to Icelandic economic activity is going to be a high cost for the economy as a whole. So, less economic growth. So all of this contributes to a weaker Icelandic economy and reduced economic growth. And this is a very significant effect, even if we only think about the fishing industry as such, because it's a base industry of the economy. It's a fundamental industry. And its direct contribution to the gross domestic product is close to 10%. This varies a bit from year to year. And the direct and indirect effect, if we count everything of that nature in a reasonable way, you will come to the conclusion that the fishing industry is contributing almost 1/4 of the Icelandic economy. So anything that happens to the fishing industry in terms of foreign competitiveness, less innovation, less productivity, or less increase in productivity, will have a big impact on the whole economy. And then we also have these spillover effects on the other sectors of the economy that I explained. So here's an example that I prepared just to illustrate this. Over the past few decades, economic growth in Iceland has averaged 2.5%. The fishing industry approximately has contributed about 0.7% of this growth annually. Now, let's assume that the fishing industry contribution to the growth falls from 0.7% to 0.2%. It is still growing or contributing to the growth of the economy, so it's not an extreme example, but it just falls by 0.5%. Then total economic growth falls to 2%, from 2.5 to 2%, unless there is a compensating growth somewhere else in the economy, coming through the government somehow and generating growth, which cannot be excluded on logical grounds, but I think empirical reasoning will suggest that this is unlikely to happen. So, this would be the development of the Icelandic gross domestic product, assuming 2.5% annual increase in economic growth. If that growth rate drops to 2%, then we'll get this growth path. And to make this even more clear, after 5 years only, there is a 2.5% difference in the gross domestic product. A significant amount of money that is already being lost on my assumptions. And I think my assumptions are reasonable. It's easy to get higher numbers. 10 years, 5%. 20 years, 10.3%. So you see this is self-defeating. The argument for a special fisheries tax, apart from the fallacies that I've basically demolished, I hope, is that even so, the proponents would say it generates revenues to pay for government services, crucial government services like hospitals, health, schools, and the welfare system. Okay, but this is an illusion. This is too optimistic because of this economic growth effect. Less economic growth will lead to reduced tax revenues in the future. And the only calculation you can make is to calculate when will the government actually have less revenues. And I think, that calculation would turn out to be maybe close to 10 years. In any case, eventually there will be less funds to pay for government services. So, special fisheries taxation will end up hurting the people it's supposed to help. The people who rely on welfare and government services. So, I would be tempted to say, especially if this was a political meeting, to say, well, you people, you are hypocrites. You claim to be helping the poor people and increasing welfare, but the effect of your suggestions is going to be the reverse. It will be less in the future because of this economic effect on production and productivity and economic growth. So, just one transparency about auctions. If you have the situation we have in the fishery, you already got clear property rights, clear harvesting rights. You already got a very well functioning markets for these rights, both permanent transfers and rent and temporary transfer leases, very well functioning market. There is basically no a priori reason or prima facie reason to introduce auctions. The market is already working. And then to the usual disadvantages of taxation, auctions would add, as I see it, new uncertainty to businesses. Will we get the rights or not? That's an additional uncertainty they don't have today. And any uncertainty costs money. You have to adjust to it somehow, and that can be translated into an outlay, monetary outlay. You can even insure against it in principle. It leads to complicated games between the government, industry, companies with somewhat uncertain outcomes and costs. This comes out of auction theory. Auctions are subject to manipulation, collusion, and cheating because that's the way the game is set up. If you do brilliantly and somehow in the auctions, maybe you get some a priori information about what the government is intending to do afterwards and stuff like that. Maybe you can collude with the other people who are likely to bid, whatever. So that is a danger, and if it's an opportunity, people will make the effort to do these things on all sides of the auctions. So that is going to be costly. They are costly to design well. Auctions are sensitive instruments, especially when there's a lot of value that is being auctioned off. So you have to design them cleverly, and that is costly. Not only do you have to design them cleverly at the first instance, you may have to modify the design over time. And not to be forgotten that to bid sensibly in the auctions is not a straightforward thing for the companies. They will have to have expert advice on all of these things because they are in this game, and that is also going to be costly, and that's also social cost. And as Professor Leibkov said, the experience of auctions where they have been tried in fisheries, Estonia and Russia and some other places, has not been encouraging. They have, because of misdesign, improper design and various other problems, they didn't work very well and were discontinued. So, to summarize, the essence of my message is this: well-managed fisheries, especially ocean fisheries, can generate large net economic benefits relative to the landed value. These benefits are widely distributed in the economy, both in the short run, remarkably widely, and even more so in the long run, through demand effects and economic growth effects. If this wasn't true, because we have the grand historical experiment on this. We had what was called the enclosure movement in the UK in the 15th to 18th century, which, among other things, motivated Karl Marx to develop his theory about class struggle. And property rights, strong property rights, were established in land that used to be pretty common, on some legal basis and sometimes on not so legal basis. And this was to increase the productivity of the land. Quite a lot of people were dispossessed, and there was a lot of suffering associated with this. Read Das Kapital. It's a great book. But now, a couple of hundred years later, we're all better off because of this, because this was the beginning, basically, of the Industrial Revolution in Europe. So we're all better off, and this kind of experiment is repeated in different magnitude, in different forms, all over the world, all the time. Stronger property rights lead to an altered game, altered economic game, more productivity. The initial claimants, they benefit initially, and then these benefits flow throughout the economy. And that's how we've all become better off than before. And special taxation in fisheries is economically damaging. It reduces efficiency of the fishing sector and therefore on the economy as a whole, reduces economic growth, and reduces even taxation revenue in the long run. Taxes can never exceed economic growth. We should keep that in mind. Thank you. Well, and finally, auctions are a particularly damaging form, misspelling there, form of taxation. In the context of the Icelandic fishing industry and other fishing industry that are already run on the basis of individual harvesting rights. Thank you very much.